Hello, my friends. We'll start with the fact that overnight the Russians launched an Oreshnik strike on the Lviv region. It's important to note that yesterday, during the day, the United States warned that a powerful strike on Ukraine was expected. The US Embassy in Kyiv received information about a potentially significant air attack that could occur at any moment over the next several days. The embassy recommended that US citizens be prepared to immediately seek shelter in the event of an air raid alert. As we can see, there was no need to wait long. The strike took place overnight. Preliminary reports say that the Oreshnik reached the Lviv region about 15 minutes after launch, covering a distance of approximately 1,500 kilometers. It's reported that the strike targeted a gas field in the Lviv region. However, there is still no confirmed data. At the same time, gas supply problems began overnight in the region, which does serve as indirect confirmation of a hit. In the Lviv region, an object of critical infrastructure was attacked. More information will be provided later. Please remain in shelters until the all clear is given, said warhead Kozitsky. At the same time, according to some reports, just like last time, the Oreshnik missile was empty, without a warhead. Once again, no warhead. Empty separating blocks, dummy payloads, just like a year and a half ago in Dnipro. Those first two explosions that locals heard were the missile entering the atmosphere. So if this is confirmed, it would mean that the Russians are practicing Oreshnik launches in combat conditions without using an actual warhead. At the same time, it's important to emphasize that Oreshnik is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. This would already be the second instance of such test launches without a charge. Accordingly, Russia is conducting training launches and attempting to create an intimidation effect. So for now, we are waiting for more detailed information. In addition, there are reports of a large number of strikes on Kyiv. Most of the attacks there were carried out using Shahed drones. The Shahed flight map looked roughly like this. The Russians attempted to encircle the city with unmanned aerial vehicles. Strikes were also recorded in Kryvyi Rih, with the preliminary reports of 10 people injured. At the same time, Ukraine carried out strikes on Russia. One of the strikes targeted a Belgorod thermal power plant, and there were also reports of strikes on the Oryol thermal power plant, and in this way the war continues. At the same time, Merz continues to say that a ceasefire with Russia is necessary, and only after that would NATO troops be deployed in Ukraine.
The sequence of actions should be as follows. First, a ceasefire. Then security guarantees for Ukraine within the framework of a long-term agreement with Russia. And all of this is impossible without Russia's consent, as something we are likely still very far from.
Accordingly, the question arises, what kind of security guarantees are we talking about if the war continues anyway? Now, let's move to the situation along the front line and start with the border area. So the Russians are trying to expand the front as much as possible. They are attempting to resume combat operations near the village of Tetkina and are trying to break through the border. So far, they have had no success, but the attacks are ongoing. In the Sumy direction, the Russians are assaulting Oleksiivka and attempting breakthroughs near Yunakivka. At the same time, there have been no new changes along the front line, and overall activity in this area remains minimal. In the Kharkiv direction, The Russians are assaulting the village of Zelene, but over the past 24 hours they have made no progress and all attacks are being successfully repelled. In the Vovchansk area, the Russians are assaulting Staritsa, Vilcha, the outskirts of Vovchansk and Vovchansky Hutory. Activity here remains quite high, but so far they have been unable to advance further and the front line has been stabilized. In the Dvorichna direction, Russian forces continue attempts to advance toward Kutkivka, but they have had no success and the situation has remained unchanged over the past day. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians are pushing toward the outskirts of Kupiansk and are also advancing in the areas of Stepova Novoselivka and Peshane. However, over the past 24 hours, the front line hasn't changed. As before, the initiative here remains on the side of the Ukrainian forces. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Nova Krugliakivka, Borivska Andriivka, and Novoyegorivka. At the same time, activity in this area is relatively low and they have been unable to entrench themselves in the villages, so the Ukrainian forces are successfully repelling all attacks. In the Lyman direction, the Russians continue advancing toward Lyman, toward the village of Stavky, and are also assaulting Drobosheva and pushing forward in the area of Shandrigolove. However, Ukrainian soldiers report that Russian forces are now being periodically detected even in the Sviatohirsk area. The Sviatohirsk area. The situation in this sector is starting to look alarming. The Russians are no longer just lurking on the edge, their reconnaissance units have been spotted directly inside Sviatohirsk. They moved deep into the gray zone without much hesitation, as if probing the area for weak points. Two wandering Russian fighters were detected and repeatedly targeted with drone drops, but unfortunately they turned out to be unusually resilient and haven't yet been confirmed eliminated. In fact, they confidently reached the eastern part of the city, entering the beach area along the Siversky Donets River. This is no longer a random incursion, but a sign that the Russians feel relatively free and allow themselves deep penetration without immediate punishment. At this moment, there is no confirmed information either about the entrenchment or their complete elimination. However, the very trend itself is a very bad signal. If Russian reconnaissance can roam the city so freely, it indicates a serious miscalculation in this sector and a clear warning that the Russians are testing the possibility of further actions. This area must be kept under maximum attention. These two intruders could easily be followed by additional groups, and then it would no longer be about reconnaissance, but about a full-fledged attempt to gain a foothold with all the consequences. There is no time to hesitate here. Either we cut off their oxygen now, or later we will have to drive them out of established positions. In the Slavyansk direction, the Russians continue attempts to advance beyond Siversk. They are also assaulting Vasyukivka, Pazano, and Bandarne. However, so far there have been no changes along the front line in this area. Oh, okay. In the Konstantinivka direction, activity remains quite high. So, but the Russians are still unable to advance further. Attacks are recorded daily in the area of Chasiv Yar. The Russians are assaulting Pretechene, Konstantinivka, Klebenbyk and pushing toward the villages of Berestok and Rusen Yar. The Ukrainian forces also report a massive number of FPV drones being used, but this hasn't helped the Russians move forward quickly. So, as before, the line of contact remains unchanged. In the Dobropilya direction, the Russians are assaulting Sofiyivka, Shahove, Nikanorivka, Dorozhny, and Suvorove. However, despite very high activity and the use of mechanized assaults, the Russians have been unable to achieve any changes on the ground. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Rodinske, fighting continues in Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, and they are advancing along the western flank. However, as before, there have been no changes here. The Russians have still failed to fully capture Mirnograd, and Ukrainian forces remain in their positions there. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are attempting to break into the city, assaulting Filia as well as Ivanivka. However, the situation remains unchanged and all attacks are being successfully repelled. In the Pokrovsk area of Dnipropetrovsk region, the Russians are showing high activity. They are assaulting Alexandrograd and attempting breakthroughs near Oleksievka, Vishneva, and Yegorivka. However, despite all this, they haven't been able to advance further, and the alleged capture of the village of Bratske hasn't been confirmed by the Ukrainian side. It's possible this is another hasty Russian claim intended to show that they're advancing, while in reality the front line remains unchanged. In the Huliaipole direction, the Russians carried out around 40 assaults in one day. Activity is extremely high for this direction, so they are attempting breakthroughs near Solotke, Dobropilya, Varvarivka, and Zelene, and fighting is ongoing in Huliaipole. So the Russians intend to advance as quickly as possible, so artillery is being heavily used on frontline settlements. For now, we are waiting to see how events will develop. The situation is extremely difficult, but the defense is still holding. In the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians are assaulting Stepnohirsk and Primorsk. Activity is not very high, with just a few attacks over the past day. They haven't been able to hold these settlements, and the Ukrainian forces are repelling them, so the front line remains unchanged. In the Kherson direction, attacks continue, but the Russians still cannot cross to the right bank, so the situation here remains stable. And today, Poland's foreign minister said that Ukraine has partially moved drone production to Poland. Ukraine has relocated part of its unmanned aerial vehicles and missile production to Poland, Sikorsky said. The Polish foreign minister stated this in an interview with TVP World, adding that his country's interests lie in continuing to support Ukraine. We have contributed to the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine. At this point, I'm already losing count. I think this is around the 48th delivery of equipment to Ukraine. But Ukraine is responding in kind by moving part of its drone and missile production to Poland. Sikorsky also noted that in the near future, defense projects with Ukraine will be implemented under the European Union SAFE program. We're using the European Union's SAFE mechanism, under which 44 billion euros will be spent on strengthening the defense industry. Some projects will be carried out with European partners as well as with Ukraine. A lot is happening. Meanwhile, Trump has begun threatening Iran.
What about Iran? Is the aim with Iran the collapse of that awful 47-year tyranny?
Well, I don't want to say it, but I will tell you they're not doing well, as you know, probably better than anybody. They're doing very poorly. And I have let them know that if they start killing people, which they tend to do during their riots, they have lots of riots. If they do it, we're going to hit them very hard.
Now, dozens have been killed. I know you don't do red lines, but have you communicated to them what that limit of your patience is?
Well, some have been killed by, problems of crowd control and other things. We're watching it very closely. The crowds are so large, there's been a stampede. There's been 3 stampedes, and people have been killed in that, and I'm not sure I can necessarily hold somebody responsible for that. But they know, and they've been told very strongly, even more strongly than I'm speaking to you right now, that if they do that, they're going to have to pay hell.
Overall, powerful protests are continuing and the situation there is deteriorating. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.